There are too many people for the earth to sustain, and immigrants are causing the resource crisis. Climate change is obviously caused by overpopulation in the global south. Our welfare states can't afford these people. Urban overcrowding in our cities is a sign. All of that is propaganda. For centuries, governments and landlords, they have been pushing aggressively the narrative that there just simply isn't enough land to go around. The idea of overpopulation has been used for centuries to justify land clearing, enclosure and displacement, colonialism and genocide. Overpopulation was never an issue. It was an excuse, a manufactured narrative. Propaganda is a tool of war. And the result of you believing this was the enclosure of the entire island of Britain, the dispossession of all the poor, the justification for a colonial empire, a fucking gnarly one, and the continued extraction of your labour for profit. The commons in England were shared lands that everybody used for grazing. Elites at the time claimed that this was inefficient. Efficiency and progress demanded the clearings and the centralisation of ownership. But in reality, they wanted the land to graze cattle, to graze sheep, to plant firewood. This is incredibly inefficient use of land, first off. Livestock today still take 77% of global agricultural land. Pasturing, they need space to move around, and growing food to feed them. Yet this kind of farming only produces 18% of the calories that humanity needs. And it only adds 37% of the protein into our diet. It's also a terrible source of protein. Red meat is so bad for your health. In the space it takes to farm one cow, cattle for beef production, you could have 1,000 chickens. 1 hectare of arable farmland can produce in a year either 200 kilograms of edible red meat or 3,000 kilograms of chicken or turkey. 1 hectare of arable farmland can produce 40,000 kilograms of potato. Enclosures in Britain started in the 1500s. Thomas More wrote at the time, "Sheep have become so greedy and wild that they devour men themselves." Lands that had sustained villages for generations were fenced off by landlords, the peerage, and turned into pasture to graze animals. This process is documented through parish records, land use surveying, and the enclosure maps held in the British Library and the National Archives. Enclosures were justified as being more efficient, but the majority of enclosed land is underutilised or just not used at all. And since then, food imports into England have shot up. Fertile domestic land was put to non-food use, and the Doomsday to Victorian surveys show that dozens of villages all over the country disappeared, particularly in Norfolk, Suffolk and Yorkshire. The majority of MPs who passed these kinds of laws were landlords. Structured policy over a century to pull the wealth out. Now it sits in unnamed trusts in the Cayman Islands. The value is in the land, not the bank accounts. By the 1600s, many of the landless poor were then offered new opportunities to go to colonies. Colonial recruiters described England as overburdened, weighed down with its massive population. Much of the earth's prime farmland is still used for cattle and sheep. Meanwhile, 800 million people are malnourished, and 30% of the food grown is wasted. Billionaires are buying up farmland not to grow food, but to hedge capital and control markets because they understand the only real value still exists in the land. With 1 acre of land, you can feed an entire village with potatoes, or you can graze 1 sheep. Guess what Parliament chose?